Welcome to another TST Industries installation video. In this episode, we will be showing you the installation of the TST Industries low profile signaling system for the rear of the 2017 Honda Grom. This is part 2 of 3 of our installation series for the Honda Grom. In the first episode, we showed you the installation of our fender eliminators that relocate your license plate to either here or here. That is an option within the kit. We will show you how to install this kit on the rear mounted license plate mount, as well as the slightly forward front mounted kit. Part 3 of this series will focus on the pod signal kit. We will address that in a separate video. Now, this kit is available in a choice of smoked or clear lens. That's completely up to you. It is pretty simple to install. Follow along, let's get started. All right, so in the first step here, we will be extracting the sub harness that is still contained within the fender assembly that you guys saw me take off in part 1 of this series when I was installing the fender eliminator components on the bike. So for this portion, we will need a Phillips screwdriver and perhaps a needle nose plier. That always helps, it's not necessary. And depending on how you're going to be removing this sub harness, we may need a diagonal cutter for wires. I'll show you guys why. All right, so we'll flip this guy over and we will want to take off these fasteners. There are 4 of them. In addition to these 4, we have one more through the top. It's located right here. Now, doing that will release this bottom portion of this fender. We can remove this bottom part and then feed the sub harness down through the inside here until we extract this boot. We'll slip off this boot and expose the connections here. Now you'll notice you have a bunch of connections and then a continuous wire going towards the bottom here to the license plate light. Now this connection to the license plate light doesn't actually have any sort of a plug, so as I mentioned, you can just cut it off with enough length to then splice a license plate light of an aftermarket kind into this assembly, or if you're like me, you'll want to probably remove the entire length of the wire and then have as much length preserved as possible. So I'm going to take off this routing tie and make sure all my wires are loose. And then we have bullet connectors here. For the ground, we have green, and those 2 green wires from the signals go into a single receiving female. So I'll just disconnect those. This is okay to do by hand, but if they bind, this is where I bring in my needle nose pliers, and that just makes it a lot easier. And that way I don't have to yank on the wires and possibly rip off the wires from the crimps. Right, so I'll do that for both the orange and green and blue. Right now my signals are removed, unplugged, and now I just have this one wire left running to the license plate light. So now I will need to get into the license plate light. I'm going to remove these 2 Phillips screws. And doing that gives me access to the inside of the light. I will remove the bulb from this assembly, and then I will use my pliers to push in on that portion that the bulb is hanging out of, and that will dislodge the rest of my sub harness, and the sub harness will come out really easy. Now, I don't know about you guys, I actually don't have any use for these components, so I'm not going to put them to the side. They're just gone. All right, so let's move on to the next part. Okay, so now we will plug the harness in, the sub harness into the bike's harness. This is the plug that we need to plug this female portion into. So get that under this strap from the fairing. Find a key, lock it in place, and now I like to get the protective boot over this, just like it was from the factory. We'll stretch it out just like that, and then we'll just get it back into the routing clips on the sub tray here that it was originally in. Route it back all the way to the back here so that our crimp connectors are ready to be plugged into whatever else we have to connect, like our signals. Now, this end for the license plate light, for now I'll just leave it loose on the side behind the other side panel. That is a separate installation we will not be addressing in this particular install. So let's skip to the next step. All right, so for the first configuration, we will show you how to install the low profile signaling system on the rear mount setup. It'll look something like this. Install from the back, the license plate, and it will be adjustable here. You'll be able to fine tune your hanging angle. All right, then after that, we'll strip this down and show you how to install it on the more Undertail version of our Fender Eliminator. And the build for the actual signal pods will be exactly the same. The only difference will be how we go about routing the wires to the inside and making the connections. So let's start with this configuration. What I like to do is grab the license plate and get the fasteners necessary for this connection from our kit. For the license plate hookup, we will use 2 large washers, M6 by 16 millimeters long screw, and a locking nut. I will take one of those washers and the screw and get one side of the license plate through. I'll leave it hanging for myself. This will be the first step. I will leave the remaining components somewhere close by so I can reach them. Now we'll grab 2 of the L brackets from our hardware kit, along with this shoulder washer. And the shoulder washer will fit into the round hole on one of the brackets, and you will press that through, and you see that it protrudes to the other side. This actually aligns with the second bracket, configured sort of like a mirror image. And then you press the shoulder washer into that same hole to make this configuration. Then we will grab one of the smaller screws. It's still an M6 thread, but this one's a little bit shorter than the one that I used on this connection here. And we will get the head of the screw through the washer side of the shoulder washer. We will grab another one of these washers from the kit, put it on top of the screw protruding through the other side, and again, a locking nut will close off that connection. What I'd like to do now is, using a 4mm Allen and a 10mm either box wrench or open-ended or socket, whatever you're used to using, you can just tighten down on this connection just a little bit, making sure that you leave some adjustability in here for fine tuning while this thing gets on the bike. I think I overdid it just a little bit. I'm going to back it off. All right, this looks good to me. So now we'll take one of the signals, feed the wire through one of the brackets like this. Now, an important thing to remember here is that you want to do this on the side where you have the nut and not the screw head. The reason being, the nut is easy to grasp with one of these open-ended wrenches. After you've fastened the signal down with one of these nuts, there isn't a lot of room on this side, and if you have the screw head on this side, you won't be able to get in there with an Allen key. So this is a pretty crucial step here. All right, so now I will grab the plastic nut that came with the signal lamp and feed it over the wire, over the connectors, and get it threaded up. Now, I don't tighten anything down all the way until I have things already positioned on the bike and I'm fine-tuning. So, using a 16mm open-ended wrench, I'm going to turn this nut down until I have some friction but still leave the system able to be adjusted. All right, nice and tight, but loose enough to reposition. All right, so now with this configuration like this, I will superimpose this slot over the back of this screw, put a washer over the screw protruding on the other side, and then lock it down with the locking nut. This screwed connection is the same in that it uses a 4mm Allen and a 10mm box open or socket wrench. Same rules apply here. I like to snug it up, but leave some adjustability. This way I can reposition things as we move along. Now for the left side, I'm not going to go through the entire procedure showing you how to build this part, since it's essentially the same as the other side. We're just going to go ahead and fasten it to the back of the assembly and then go into the adjustment procedure. All right, I'm just going to snug this up. While I'm doing this, I'm just making sure that my license plate is sitting center and level. When I get close to being snugged up, I'm going to want to move my brackets in a way where I'll have these signals parallel with the ground. They do emit light perpendicular to the circuit board, so it is essential to get them pointed towards the rear so that the drivers behind you can actually see what you intend to do when you're signaling. All right, and I think I have it positioned pretty good here. I'm going to lock down on these two screws. The screw a little bit off center inside the mounting hole, so I'm going to reposition it and then lock it down. Once again, making sure everything is level, and that looks good. Let's lock it down. All right, since I already like the way my pods are sitting here, I'm going to lock those down too. All right, that looks good. Now we'll have to route these wires to the inside of the trunk and connect them to the sub harness. All right, so in the Fender Eliminator video, you guys saw us tighten down on the Undertail closeout screws here on either side of the bike, one being here, one being here. And so now I will loosen them up. If you're doing both of these installations, the Fender Eliminator and the signals, I suggest that you don't tighten down on this setup until you've actually routed the wires from your signals into the trunk. I'm just going to loosen these connections enough so I have some wiggle room between the closeout and the undertail, or rather the sub tray of the bike. And this will increase the amount of gap I have between the brackets here and the sub tray to pass my wires through. Now the wires are going to go into that gap here that I'm showing you right here, but from behind. And that should pass through the window up top where the wiring from the sub harness connected into the whole setup of the stock Fender. And this will require a little bit of moving around before I get it in the right spot. Okay. And now we'll repeat the procedure on the other side. So again, we'll get this behind the whole setup here, get it fed through to the top. That's sometimes a little finicky. And using a needle nose plier helps, but I'm just going to do it by hand this time. This is the right side, this is the left side. And now before I go any further, I like to plug them in while I'm holding them and I still have them identified left, right. Power up the bike, turn on one of the signals and plug it in just to make sure I have it plugged in properly. So black from the signal goes and gets plugged into the green, the double receiver. That's ground to ground. And yellow on the signal is the positive. Depending on which side you're connecting it to, it will be either orange or blue. So for the left side it's orange. That's why when I was holding the left lead, I want to plug it in right away so then I don't have any guessing. All right, now on the right side, I'm going to go black to green again, and then yellow to blue on the bike. And I'm going to test that out, and we have flashing. So now I'm just going to cover this with the boot that exists on the OEM sub harness and just get it tucked out of the way, making sure that when you close the seat on this location, nothing gets clamped or snagged. And I like to make use of this routing clip here. And again, making sure everything's out of the way. All right, so we're done up top here. We're going to go down to the bottom and finalize some things. All right, so now that we have everything hooked up and routed properly, you can choose to take these wires behind and zip tie them to this portion of your license plate bracket. I happen to think that it's nice and tight and it doesn't really require that, but if you choose to do that, that's cool. One thing I want to mention is that the wire here should not be going in behind the bracket and then up. It should be to the side of this bracket and then going up into the undertail. So once you make sure that is done, we can tighten down on these connections that we loosened for the purpose of this installation. So we'll use the 10mm socket on top, 4mm Allen on the bottom, and get those nice and snug and tighten them all the way. All right. Now I will just make sure that my plastic nuts behind these signals are turned in all the way. They are plastic nuts that thread onto plastic studs. You do not want to over tighten them. The plastic actually keeps enough friction in the system that your signals will not rotate. Just want to have them nice and snug and make sure if you try to manipulate them by hand, they won't rotate. All right, so the seat can go back on and we will test the system one more time. Show you guys the functionality. We have right, we have left, back to right. If you guys notice, we do have the proper flash rate going on here. This is 85 cycles per minute. This particular bike is outfitted with our Gen 2 flasher relay. When you go from an incandescent type lamp for a signal to an LED type signal, the symptom will be that the signal will be stuck on or it'll be flashing really, really fast. So for that purpose, you can wire in resistors that we do sell, or you can go with a plug and play type installation product like the flasher relay that we also sell in conjunction with these parts. Choice is yours. We recommend the relay. All right, so at this point, I am going to take apart these components and reconfigure this bike to have the more Undertail forward mount for the license plate, and I'll show you guys the installation of these signals in that configuration. All right, so I'm not going to bore you guys with the installation of the bracket and the signals in this spot because you guys have seen the installation of the bracket in a previous video, and you saw the installation of the signals and configuration of all the brackets for these signals in previous scenes in this video. So really the only difference between this spot and this spot for the signals is the routing and how you're going to get the wires inside of the trunk space. Okay, so on the left side, right behind here, there is a slot where the OEM fender came out of. It slid out of there. It has a slot left behind, and that slot actually has a gap in it that leads to the inside of our trunk space where we will need to wire these signals into and make the connections in there. So I'm gonna push this in here until I get it into the top, and then we'll reconfigure the camera and show you guys a top view so you know exactly how to wire them in. I'm gonna do that on both sides. On the right side of the bike, it's a little bit more difficult to get the actual crimps to fit through the little gap left behind in that slot, but if you jiggle it around enough, you can actually get it in there. And then it's as simple as just grabbing it from the top and pulling it through. All right, so I have both of these configured in a way where I could pick up from the top, so that's what we'll do. All right, so let's now take the battery strap off so we could move this battery to the front and get a little bit more access to the inside here before we start routing the wires that we inserted from the bottom to the top. The battery just needs to be moved forward. Now we'll have access to this void here, and we'll be able to snake the wire through there. A tool I like to use is a exhaust spring puller that enables me to get inside a small space and grab a wire and pull it through. Alright, what I'm going to do is probably just default to getting it through on the outside of this tube, and then manipulating it towards the inside of the trunk. I have it here, and now I'm just gonna get it under that tube. This will make it just a little bit easier. And you just have to be careful not to rip off the crimp connectors. They aren't very fragile, but if you pull hard enough, they will come off. Alright, got the yellow out. Now the black is out. And I have my wire routed to the inside. So before I move to the other side, I'm going to get my sub harness in proper position here. What I'd like to do is get it fed to the inside so I can make all my connections here in this portion. If I were trying to get it done outside of the trunk compartment, outside of the center, you have legs, standoffs that put pressure on the frame from the seat, and then there's a chance that you will grind through these wires at some point, and that's just not a good day for anyone. So let's go ahead and get this thing wired up in the center and out of the way of any components that could damage it. I actually don't really need the license plate light lead in there, seeming as it doesn't like to fit in there. Maybe we'll try just these guys and leave this guy back out in the trunk. Now we'll need some extra length around here. But now, pretty much good to go here. I can go ahead and connect this, knowing that yellow on the left side goes to orange, and black on the signal connects to the green ground. I'm going to quickly power up the bike and verify that. And it's verified. I'm good to go here. Now I will go ahead and get the other side done. So this side is actually a little bit more finicky because we have less space on this side. So I'm going to remove the fuses from their location here and try to get in there. That spot is awfully small, so it may actually require that we drop the sub tray a little bit, and that step will require the removal of all these screws, or at least loosening them. So let's see what we can do here. All right, so now the right side of the bike, we're going to do the same thing with a couple small changes. Get the wire in, and then on this side the situation is much tighter, like I mentioned. I initially thought that taking off or loosening these fasteners here is going to be necessary, but I rethought the situation, and I think I could get us enough access behind this component here, this portion of the sub tray, by just prying it away from the frame using a tool. I'm using a needle nose plier that's in there, and now all I have to do is just wiggle around my wires enough so that I can grab them and pull them through the top here. Now I see them from this side. Maybe I could influence them to go to the other side of the frame component where I could grab them and pull them up. If this is too cumbersome for you, then I would suggest that you drop these components, and then the sub tray will drop slightly and give you more access, and you can always do it that way. I just always like to do things in the least invasive manner. No one can argue that this is not less invasive than the other version, but I already have things bolted up, so I like to keep them there. I know this is possible because I just found one of the wires here. All I have to do is get it up to the top and we'll be good to go. Boom. Yellow is through. And where there's yellow, black will follow. Just gotta make sure not to strain anything. Now it is caught on something down there. I want to make sure I don't pull against whatever's catching it. I only want to pull it up if it's coming up freely. Alright, black is out, and now I just have to get myself enough length to plug these guys in. So at this moment, we are still finding resistance to feeding this thing through. So I'm just going to do a little bit of prying against the bottom of the sub tray, and I'm going to push the wire in from the outside to the inside, and that feeds it in for me just like this, and now I have that extra length. And I'll check if I have enough, and if not, just repeat that same step one more time. And I'm pretty sure I'm good on this now. I have a good amount of length here. I'm gonna go ahead and plug it in. On the right side we have yellow going into blue, and then the black is going into the common green ground rather. And our components can remain here. I just need to make sure I'm not routing through this compartment here with a where my fuses go. So I'm just going to quickly swap this around to the outside, and once I have it in proper placement here, I'm going to get this out, and there we go. This configuration looks pretty good. I think I'm happy with it. Just making sure that nothing is snagged, and I can safely tuck all these wires away. Quickly power up the bike, test the right side. Right side's working. I keep hitting the horn. I don't know why. All right. Rookie mistake. I just dislodged this guy here. This is our spare fuse. Back in action there. I'm going to replace the battery. Replace the battery strap. Grab a 10mm socket here really quickly and finish that off. We'll be on to our next step. All right, we are all wired up, ready to go. At this point, we just need to tighten up on all the fastener connections and make sure that signals are lined up horizontally, or whatever your preference is. You might be the type of person that likes them slightly slanted. That's good if that's what you're into. I like them horizontal and also pointing in the direction that you're going to be signaling to turn into. So that's my preference. You guys can go along with your preference. And tighten down this bolted connection, followed by the other side bolted connection. All right. My signal brackets are already adjusted on the hinge rotating axis. So the only thing left to do is to tighten up the signals, plastic nuts on the signals from the back. And once again, I mentioned this before on the previous installation, you only really want to go as tight as you need to go to lock them in place. There's quite a bit of friction between the plastic nuts and the metal brackets here, so you don't really need to over tighten them. If you do over tighten them, you run the risk of actually breaking the stud off the back of the signal. That's probably not a good day. All right, so the last step here is to replace the seat. And this seat usually gives me some trouble, but I managed to get it done. All right, hope you guys enjoyed this video. As you can see, We have nice, sleek results with the combination of our Fender Eliminator and our low profile signaling system. I hope you guys consider subscribing to our channel. We roll out with new videos for this bike and other bikes on a consistent basis. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, please place them below in the comment field. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time.